Welcome, dear listener. Settle in and let the world soften around you. The days rush, slipping away like waves against the shore. Wrap yourself in a blanket of quiet and warmth. Take a slow breath. Feel the comfort of a lamp's golden glow beside you, and let your thoughts drift gently, because tonight I have a story to carry you somewhere between memory and magic. A house that remembers more than just walls and rooms, and a journey that whispers softly of love, loss, and the courage to move forward. So rest your mind and let the tale begin. On the evening the rain decided not to stop. It tapped gently on the windows like curious fingers, the kind of rain that makes streets shine and slows the world down. Elian was folding laundry when the knock came, soft but certain, as if it knew it would be answered. The letter felt heavier than paper should, the envelope slightly warped from the damp air, and when Elian saw the handwriting, his breath caught in his chest. It was his mother's writing, round and careful, the way she used to label jars and leave notes by the kettle. The date made no sense at all, written many years after she had been laid to rest, and inside there was only an address and a single line saying, "The house will wake when you return." He stood there a long while, listening to the rain slide down the glass, his fingers trembling just enough to notice. Memories stirred quietly like embers, his mother humming while cooking, the smell of salt from the sea drifting through open windows, the way the house used to feel safe even when the world felt too loud. Grief rose slow and warm, not sharp, more like an ache that had learned how to live inside him. By morning he was on the road, the bus moving steadily along the coast, tires whispering over wet asphalt. Elian watched familiar cliffs appear one by one, the sea breathing beside him. He wondered why he had stayed away so long, or maybe he knew and had simply never said it out loud. Some places ask too much of the heart, and he had been young and tired then, when he stepped off in the town. The air smelled of rain and old wood. Shops looked smaller than he remembered, yet unchanged. People glanced up and smiled as if greeting someone expected. His name passed from mouth to mouth softly. No surprise in their faces, only recognition. As though he had just been out for a long walk and not gone for years, and that unsettled him more than anger ever could. As he walked the narrow road toward the edge of town, his thoughts grew quieter, each step bringing a gentle pull in his chest. The house appeared slowly through the mist, paint unpeeled but proud, windows dark yet watchful. It stood exactly as it always had, waiting patiently. Elian placed his hand on the gate, the wood cool and familiar. A strange comfort settled over him, like being remembered by something that never forgot. The rain softened into a hush as evening leaned closer, and the house seemed to breathe along with him, holding its secrets for just a little longer, inviting him inside with a silence that felt warm and full of promise. The door closed behind Elian with a soft wooden sigh, the sound settling into the house like a held breath finally released. The floor creaked gently beneath his shoes, as if greeting his weight after a long absence, and the air wrapped around him warm and familiar, carrying a faint scent of dust, salt, and something sweeter he could not name. As he stood still, he felt it first before he understood it. The walls seemed to rise and fall ever so slightly, not moving exactly, more like a feeling against the skin, as though the house itself was breathing alongside him. Elian placed his palm against the wallpaper, half expecting warmth, half expecting nothing at all. And a quiet shiver ran through him, not fear, just surprise. He walked from room to room, slowly, careful, like one might be around a sleeping child. The living room looked ordinary at first, but when he turned back from the window, the old armchair had shifted closer to the lamp, and a knitted blanket lay folded just as his mother used to leave it. His heart skipped softly. He told himself, houses settle, memories play tricks. Yet, his chest felt full. In the kitchen he heard the faint clink of glass. And there, on the counter, sat his mother's favorite teacup, the one that had chipped long ago. He was sure it had been broken. Yet, here it was, waiting patiently. Elian laughed under his breath, a small sound, asking the empty room if it thought. This was funny. The house answered only with silence, gentle and knowing. Mirrors were the hardest. In the hallway, he caught his reflection, standing a little younger, shoulders less heavy, eyes brighter. When he blinked, it was gone, replaced by his present self. In another room, the mirror showed his mother passing by the doorway, humming softly. He reached out without thinking, fingers brushing cold glass. His throat tightened, but the feeling was not painful. It was tender. As evening crept in, shadows stretched longer than they should. The house grew quieter, yet fuller. The wood popped softly like a fire settling. The stairs murmured under their own weight, and when night finally arrived, Elian lay on the old bed listening. The mattress remembered his shape, and somewhere between waking and sleep, the house whispered his name, not loud, not urgent, but close. Like a secret shared between family, he whispered back, without realizing, just a small yes. His thoughts wandered to all he had forgotten, the way his mother used to tuck him in, the promises he never kept, the leaving that had felt necessary. At the time, tears gathered but did not fall. Instead, they warmed his eyes and stayed there, as if the house did not want him to cry just yet. Lying there, Elian understood something slowly, the way one understands a truth long after hearing it. The house was not haunted by spirits or sorrow. It was filled with memory, holding moments carefully like pressed flowers. It was remembering him, and maybe waiting to see if he would remember. The walls breathed evenly as sleep pulled him under, and the house listened, already preparing what it would show him next. Morning arrived quietly, carried in on the sound of gulls and distant waves. Elian stepped outside and felt the town stretch awake around him, doors opening at the same moments. Footsteps falling into familiar rhythms. It felt like walking into a song he used to know by heart. He wandered down the main street, hands in his pockets, noticing how everything moved just as it always had. The same man sweeping the same patch of road, the same woman watering the same flowers. Even the bell above the shop door rang at the exact second he remembered. It was comforting at first, like being wrapped in routine. Yet something about the perfection made his shoulders tense. At the small library, the scent of old paper welcomed him in. The librarian smiled warmly and slid a book across the counter. Before he could speak, it was one he remembered loving, though he was certain he had never borrowed it. She said his name gently and told him it was overdue, as if time had simply paused, waiting for him. Elian accepted it without argument, feeling oddly grateful and uneasy all at once. Next came the bakery, warm air spilling out with the smell of bread and sugar. The baker handed him a loaf, wrapped in paper, pressing it into his hands with a knowing nod. It was the same kind his mother used to buy. Crust just crisp enough. Elian's throat tightened as he thanked him. The baker smiled, but his eyes looked tired, like someone repeating a line too many times. As Elian walked on, conversations floated around him, familiar voices trailing off before finishing their thoughts. People spoke as if expecting someone else to complete their sentences. He noticed pauses where words should have been, silences that felt trained and careful. It made him wonder what might happen if someone spoke too much or too freely. Near the old pier, he met an old friend. Older now, shoulders stooped, eyes sharp. With worry, they spoke softly about ordinary things, the weather, the sea. Memories shared like warm tea. Then his friend leaned closer and whispered not to let the house finish the story. The words lingered heavy between them. Elian wanted to ask more, but his friend stepped back as if he had said too much already. Walking home, Elian's thoughts churned gently. The town felt kind, welcoming, yet strangely rehearsed. He wondered if it had always been this way, or if he had simply never noticed as a child. A sense of care wrapped around him, but it came with a tightness, like a hug held just a little too long. He missed his mother fiercely then, wishing she were there to explain it all. By nightfall, the house felt warmer than before. Lamps glowed softly without being lit. As Elian moved toward the door, a quiet click echoed through the hallway. He tried the handle and found it firm, locked without his touch. Instead of fear, he felt a calm settle over him, like being tucked in by something that loved him deeply. Outside, the town hummed in its steady rhythm, and inside the house held him close, waiting for the next morning to remember a little more. The morning floor creaked beneath Elian's bare feet as he crossed the hallway. The sound slower and deeper than before, as if the house were stretching awake with him. A loose board near the corner dipped slightly when he stepped on it, and something about that small movement tugged at his memory. He knelt down, fingers brushing the worn wood, the scent of old polish and dust rising softly. When he lifted the board, it came away too easily, as though it had been waiting beneath. It lay a bundle wrapped in faded cloth, tied with a ribbon his mother used to keep for special things. Elian's hands trembled as he unwrapped it, his heart already knowing before his mind could catch up. Inside were journals, their covers worn smooth by years of touch, pages filled with his mother's careful handwriting. He sat back against the wall and opened the first one. Her words flowed gently, telling stories of the town, of its people, of memories that needed keeping. She wrote of a role passed quietly from one generation to the next, calling it the keeper, chosen not by force but by love. As Elian read on, the house seemed to listen, the walls settling, the air growing warmer. The journals spoke of how memories were woven into the rooms, how regret and love and unfinished lives fed the house, keeping the town safe, unchanged. Held in a careful pause, his mother wrote that safety sometimes asked for stillness, and stillness asked for sacrifice. Elian swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words press gently against his chest. He paused often, resting his hand over the page, whispering her name softly, remembering how tired she used to look some evenings, how she smiled anyway. He felt both pride and ache, realizing she had carried this alone, choosing protection over freedom. His thoughts drifted to the town outside, so kind and familiar, now revealed as something carefully held, not trapped, but sheltered. The journals began to thin near the end, entries growing shorter, more urgent, then suddenly stopping. Elian turned the final pages slowly, his breath shallow, and there it was. His name circled again and again, pressed into the paper with darker ink. The sight of it made his hands go cold. He traced the circles gently, as if they might answer him in that quiet moment. Understanding settled over him like a heavy blanket, comforting and suffocating all at once. He saw himself not as a visitor, but as a continuation, the one his mother had prepared without ever saying the words out loud. The house had not called him back by accident. It had been waiting for him to remember the promise he never knew he had made. Elian closed the journals and held them to his chest. The house breathing evenly around him. Outside the town moved in its careful rhythm, and inside something old and patient stirred, as if turning a page, ready to see whether he would accept what had always been his to carry. The house did not wait for morning. It began just before dawn, when the light was thin and uncertain. Footsteps echoed where Elian had not walked, doors sighed open on their own, and the air felt tight against his skin, like a held breath that had gone on too long. The first memory came gently, almost kindly. He was back in the kitchen years ago, his voice raised, his mother standing still by the sink, her hands wet, her eyes tired. The words he had thrown carelessly now floated heavy between them. He tried to speak, to soften them, but the scene played on without him, repeating exactly as it had been, and his chest ached with the old regret. He turned away, only to find himself in another room that was not quite right. The walls leaned closer, the hallway stretched longer than it should. Doors opened into moments he had tried to forget. Failures whispered back to him, nights of doubt, letters left unanswered, dreams set aside. Each memory felt warmer than the last, richer, fuller, and he sensed the house drawing them in, growing steadier with every feeling he could not hold back. Elian pressed his palms against the walls, asking softly for it to stop, his voice sounding small in the wide spaces. He tried to steady his breathing, reminding himself that these were only memories, but they clung to him like old wool, heavy and familiar. Part of him wondered if this was what the house needed, if this was why it had waited so patiently, feeding not on fear, but on love tangled with sorrow. Outside, the town began to shift. Elian glimpsed it through a window that led nowhere. Buildings flickered between years, paint peeling, then restoring itself. Children growing older in the span of a blink. The sea pulling back too far before rushing in again. Time no longer held gently, but leaking forward like water through cupped hands. The safety his mother had built was unraveling thread by thread. His heart tightened then, not just for himself, but for everyone beyond those walls. The librarian with her careful smile, the baker with tired eyes, the friend who had warned him too softly. Elian understood now that the house was hungry because it was afraid of losing what it held together for so long. And in that fear, it reached for him, asking without words for what it believed he owed. The walls seemed to close in, not threatening but insistent, memories circling like warm hands at his back. The message was clear in the steady breathing of the house. To save the town, someone must stay, someone must remember. For everyone else, keeper was no longer a title whispered in journals. It was a demand settling firmly into place. As the house quieted for a moment, holding him in that pause between choice and surrender, Elian stood still, listening to its rhythm, the night wrapping around the town like a fragile blanket, waiting to see whether he would step forward or be gently pulled in. "The house," answered Elian before he even raised his voice. The floor beneath him pulsed softly, the walls releasing. A low sigh, like someone settling into a chair after a long day. The air grew warmer and heavier, pressing close, as if inviting him to speak at last. He stood in the center of the old living room, fists clenched, heart thudding louder than the ticking clock that had started on its own, and he asked the house why it had taken his mother, why it had let her stay until her smile grew tired and her eyes dimmed. His words came out rough, but not angry, more like the pleading of a child who had waited far too long for an answer. The walls responded gently, not with words, but with sight. The room darkened and then opened into another version of the town, one that felt wrong from the first breath. Streets cracked and uneven, houses leaning like weary elders, people wandering without rhythm or memory, grief hanging in the air, thick and sharp. Elian saw neighbors arguing, children crying without comfort, the sea swallowing parts of the shore with no one left to remember how to rebuild. He stepped through the vision slowly, his feet heavy, watching time rush forward without care, faces aging too fast, laughter turning brittle, loss spreading like cold through every home. The town had not been cruel, just forgotten by memory itself, and that forgetting had taken everything gentle with it. Elian's chest tightened as he understood what his mother had been shown all those years ago. The house shifted again, softer this time, showing his mother standing where he now stood, her hair darker then, her hands steady, though her eyes held fear. Elian watched her listen to the same promise of safety, the same quiet demand. He saw the moment she nodded, choosing captivity over watching the town unravel, choosing stillness so others could sleep peacefully, and choosing her son not out of burden but out of trust. Elian whispered her name, feeling warmth and ache bloom together. He remembered her late nights, her gentle tiredness, the way she always stayed, even when staying cost her more than leaving ever could. Part of him wanted to be angry at her for choosing this path for him, but a larger part felt the depth of her love, heavy and careful, like a blanket tucked tightly around the whole town. Yet, as the visions faded, Elian noticed something else, something the house had never asked him to see. The people in the preserved town smiled, yes, but their smiles never deepened. Children never grew past certain ages. Grief never healed because it was never allowed to exist fully. Joy stayed small and safe, untouched by risk. The stillness that protected them also held them back, like birds kept warm in a closed cage. Elian spoke again, his voice softer now. He told the house that safety without change was another kind of loss, that memory should guide life, not replace it. He spoke of his own leaving, his failures, the pain that had shaped him into someone who could choose differently now. The walls quieted as if listening more carefully than before. The house trembled slightly, floorboards easing apart, walls loosening their hold. For the first time, its steady breathing faltered. It had never been questioned like this, never asked to consider the cost of its protection. It had learned only to hold tighter when afraid, and now it hesitated, unsure whether letting go might also be a form of care. The clock slowed, the air softened, and Elian felt a gentle stillness settle around him. Not the frozen kind, but the quiet before a new story begins. The house waited, listening to his heartbeat. And somewhere beyond the walls, the town rested under the night sky, unaware that its future had begun to shift just enough to dream of something different. Asterisk. The morning felt different the moment Elian stepped outside. The air moved with a softer restlessness, like a breeze, unsure where it wished to go. Footsteps sounded uneven on the street, not wrong, just newly alive, and somewhere a window opened. At an unfamiliar hour, Elian began with the smallest thing he could think of. He returned the book to the library, placing it gently on the counter and telling the librarian he was sorry it had taken so long. She blinked, surprised, then smiled wider than before, finishing a sentence she had always left hanging, thanking him properly, and as he turned away, the shelves behind her shifted slightly, making space for something new. At the bakery, he handed back a few coins he had once borrowed and never returned. The baker frowned in confusion before laughing softly, choosing a different loaf than usual for the display. Elian felt a lightness in his chest, as though something unseen had loosened its grip. He walked slower now, paying attention to each step, each word, as if care itself were a kind of key. He sought out conversations he had once fled from, listening until the end, offering apologies without excuses, finishing thoughts others had swallowed for years. Each moment felt small and trembling, but real in a way the town had not known for a long time. Doors creaked open that had always stayed shut. Paths bent slightly out of habit, then straightened into something new inside the house. The changes were felt immediately. The walls shuddered faintly. Pictures slipped from their perfect alignment. The steady breathing grew uneven. Elian could sense the house watching him closely now, not pleased, not calm, but unsettled. Memories loosened their hold, slipping free like leaves, finally letting go of branches. People began choosing differently. A woman closed her shop early just to watch the sunset. A child ran past his usual stopping point, laughing louder than expected. An old man changed the tune he whistled every morning. These choices were small, but they frightened the town and delighted it all at once. Elian saw uncertainty flicker across familiar faces, followed by something brighter, something brave. With each step forward, the house grew louder. Floors rattled, doors slammed without warning, mirrors cracked and reformed, replaying scenes faster and faster, as if trying to remind Elian of what was being lost. He felt fear then, not sharp, but heavy, wondering if he was tearing away something precious beyond repair. His thoughts wandered to his mother, to how carefully she had chosen stillness, how she had believed safety was worth any price. Elian felt love swell alongside doubt. He whispered that he understood her now, even as he chose differently. His heart ached with the tenderness of that contradiction. The house shook harder, the walls groaning like an old guardian pushed too far, and then it spoke clearly at last. Not in words, but in certainty. If it fell, the memories would go with it. Every laugh held in its walls, every tear pressed into its floors, gone forever, like breath in cold air. The town would move forward, yes, but without the past to guide it. Elian stood still, palms pressed against the trembling walls, feeling the warmth of countless lives beneath his hands. He felt the weight of choice settle fully into him, heavier than fear, heavier than duty, yet softened by love. He knew now that saving something did not always mean keeping it unchanged. As the house quieted just enough to listen, the town rested in its uneven rhythm, candles flickering in windows at new times, paths bending toward unknown tomorrows, and Elian closed his eyes, breathing with the house one last time, ready to decide how memory and living might finally walk together into the next night. The house grew quiet as night settled in, not the tense quiet of waiting, but the softer kind that comes after a long day, floorboards easing their creaks, walls releasing their tight hold, and the air drifting gently as if ready for sleep. Elian felt it the moment he stepped back inside, like the house had finally decided to rest. He lit a single lamp and sat in the old living room, the glow warming the corners, shadows resting instead of stretching. And then the memory came without warning, not forced, not replayed, but invited. He was small again, sitting on the floor, while his mother brushed his hair, humming softly, the sound uneven but full of care, the smell of soap and sea clinging to her clothes. He felt the warmth of her hands, steady and sure, heard her laugh when he wriggled away, felt the simple safety of being known completely. The house did not rush the moment. It did not repeat it or sharpen it. It simply let it be. And Elian realized this memory had never needed walls to hold it. It had lived quietly inside him all along. He stayed with that feeling, letting it pass naturally like a tide pulling back. His thoughts grew gentle. He understood then that memories were not fragile things to be locked away. They were living companions, changing shape as the heart grew, and trying to freeze them had only made them heavy, like holding water too tightly. In closed hands, the night moved slowly, kindly, the house breathing softer than ever before. Elian walked through each room one last time, touching door frames, smoothing curtains, whispering thanks without knowing exactly to whom. The house listened without answering content, to simply be present. When the sky began to pale, Elian opened the first window. Cool sea air rushed in, carrying salt and promise. Curtains lifted and fluttered freely. He moved from room to room, opening doors, windows, letting the house fill with morning, with sound, with life that did not ask permission. The house did not resist. It did not shake or sigh. It simply went still, not empty, but peaceful, as if its long duty had ended. Elian stood in the doorway, watching the light spread across the floors, feeling no fear, only a deep, tired tenderness, like saying goodnight to someone who had finally earned their rest. Outside, the town woke differently. Shops opened at new hours. Voices rose unevenly. Someone laughed too loud, someone else cried. Without hiding it, paint peeled without fixing itself. Children ran without stopping. The town felt imperfect and unsure, and wonderfully alive. Elian stepped onto the porch, the house behind him, quiet and content, the sea ahead, breathing steadily, the town stretching awake, like a body, learning new movement. And as the sun lifted fully into the sky, the night released its hold, leaving behind a gentle promise that living, even when messy, was the truest way to remember. The sound came softly, at first, a low, settling sigh, like an old chair finally giving in to rest. Elian stood still as the house shifted inward on itself, beams easing, walls relaxing, not crashing but folding gently, until what remained was only wood and space and quiet. ordinary and still. By morning, the house looked smaller, emptied of its watchful warmth, windows dull, rooms hollow. Nothing breathing behind the walls anymore. People gathered slowly, hands folded, voices hushed. No one rushed to fix or rebuild. They stood remembering what had been held for them for so long. Grief passed through the crowd like a shared wind, tender and unashamed. The town mourned in small ways. The librarian closed the shop for a day and wept over a book she finally remembered losing. The baker burned a batch of bread and laughed through tears. Stories surfaced uneven and raw, not polished by the house anymore, but spoken with trembling honesty. Each memory carried by its owner, now heavy but real. Elian stayed, not because he was asked, but because it felt right. He walked the streets without duty, pressing his shoulders, listening instead of guarding, watching instead of holding. People spoke to him openly, sometimes painfully, sharing moments they were learning to remember on their own. He answered gently, knowing he was no longer meant to keep their past safe, only to witness it being lived inside himself. Elian felt both lighter and lonelier. The purpose he had almost inherited had slipped away, leaving space behind he missed. The house, in quiet moments, missed its steady breathing, yet he understood this ache, too, was part of living forward. Memory was no longer a shelter, but a companion walking beside him, sometimes stumbling, sometimes strong. The days grew uneven, beautifully so. Routines bent and broke. New habits formed without asking permission. Arguments happened and healed. Laughter surprised people by lasting longer than expected. The town learned that remembering could hurt, but it could also deepen joy. Each story carried now with hands that trembled and hearts that chose to keep going anyway. At dusk, Elian often sat near the shore, watching the sea change color without repeating itself. The town behind him hummed with uncertain life, no longer protected from loss, yet no longer frozen by it either. The future stretched ahead, unmarked and wide, and as night settled gently over rooftops and waves, Elian breathed. In the freedom of not knowing, feeling at last that uncertainty could be a kindness too. The morning sun broke gently over the horizon, painting the sea in soft gold and rose. Elian's feet sank into the cool sand as he walked slowly along the shore, the waves curling and retreating like whispered memories, and in his hand, a letter rested, its paper worn, familiar, and yet strange because it was his own handwriting calling from the past. He unfolded it carefully, feeling the rough edges between his fingers, and read aloud, voice quiet against the rhythm of the tide. The words simple but heavy. You did not save the past, you saved the right to move on. He repeated them softly, tasting each syllable, feeling the truth of them settle warmly into his chest. Elian knelt and held the letter above the small flame he had kindled in a shallow pit of sand. Smoke curling in the cool morning air, the paper crackling gently, releasing the scent of ink and ash. He watched the words vanish, one by one, drifting upward before the wind carried the ashes out over the waves, and a strange lightness settled over him, the weight of duty, long past, finally easing from his shoulders. Behind him, the town stirred quietly, laughter spilling from open windows, children chasing each other across streets that no longer remembered perfection, voices uneven and real, the scent of bread from the bakery mingling with the salt of the sea, and Elian listened, letting each sound reach him fully, not as a keeper, but as someone who had witnessed a story and was allowed to rest with it now. He wandered slowly along the edge of the water, feeling sand shift beneath his toes, the tide brushing against his ankles, the horizon widening endlessly ahead. He realized the letter was not a command or a warning, but a gentle reminder that life was meant to move forward, that memories could be carried lightly in the heart without needing walls or whispers to hold them. Elian's thoughts drifted naturally, remembering his mother, the house, the town, the years spent learning that living and remembering were not the same. He smiled quietly to himself, thinking how strange and tender it was to finally be free of fear and perfection, how much he had grown, and how gently the world now allowed him to be part of it without carrying it all alone. The breeze lifted the edges of his shirt, the salty air brushing his face, seagulls wheeled overhead, and somewhere a door creaked in the distance. Part of the town stretching awake and imperfect, fully alive. Elian felt warmth rise from the earth into his bones, a soft, steady joy that belonged to the morning itself. He whispered thanks to the waves, to the wind, and even to the house that no longer needed to remember. He stayed there for a long time, letting the ashes drift farther, watching the sun climb, listening to the laughter and life growing around him, knowing that the past had been honored not by holding it still, but by choosing to walk forward. And as the wind carried the remnants of paper and memory out to sea, Elian felt something else awaken quietly, a kind of peace that promised more stories, more living, more days yet to be shaped. And somewhere, where the house once stood, empty now, a gentle dreaming stirred, not of memory, but of quiet possibility, waiting softly for the next story to arrive, ready without asking anything of anyone.